For more than a century, the Titanic has remained hidden in the darkest depths of the North Atlantic. What most people think they already know about this shipwreck still leaves entire areas unexplored in detail. With every descent, new traces emerge where time seems frozen in 1912. Between corroded steel and absolute silence, some discoveries continue to challenge what we believed about that night. Before we go any deeper into this historic site, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us until the end of this exploration. At nearly 12,500 feet below the surface, the submersible finally reaches the floor of the North Atlantic. Pressure here is extreme, and temperatures remain near freezing year-round. Fine sediment blankets the seabed in a continuous layer, slowly accumulated over decades. Navigation instruments confirm we are inside the Titanic debris field. Every movement must be carefully controlled. Any disturbance can compromise visibility. In this silent environment, the first physical evidence of the wreck begins to appear. As the submersible moves forward, the debris field expands across the camera's view. Objects from different sections of the ship are scattered across hundreds of feet, the result of impact and the hull's separation during the descent. Broken china, wood fragments, and metal components lie mixed with the seabed sediment. Many of these items were expelled from the ship before it ever reached the bottom. Their uneven distribution helps researchers reconstruct the dynamics of the sinking. Each fragment marks a moment of collapse from 1912. The silhouette of Titanic's hull slowly takes shape ahead, emerging from the darkness. Steel plates once perfectly aligned are now bent and fractured by pressure and impact. Rusticles blanket the surface, formed by decades of bacterial activity. Through deformed openings, the collapsed interior becomes visible. This first direct contact reveals the true scale of the structure on the ocean floor. The Titanic isn't just sunk, it's still changing. As the submersible tracks along the hull, evidence of structural failure becomes unmistakable. Exposed beams and torn steel plates mark the points where the ship gave way under combined forces of impact and pressure. Rivets that once held the structure together now appear misaligned or pulled free. These damages help researchers understand how the Titanic broke apart during its descent. Every tear in the hull records a specific moment of rupture from 1912. The submersible passes through an opening in the hull and enters an interior section of the ship. Corridors have collapsed, with detached doors and fallen structures blocking former passageways. With no natural light, navigation becomes slow and deliberate. These internal spaces reveal how the Titanic's interior was progressively crushed after impact with the seabed. Every narrow passage shows just how much the ship has changed since that April night. Inside the Titanic, everyday objects remain scattered as they were left during evacuation. Plates, glasses, and cutlery have endured better than fabric or paper. Marine incrustation now covers surfaces once polished, yet their original function is still recognizable. These items reveal routines that were abruptly interrupted that night. Among the debris, suitcases and luggage appear torn open or split by impact. Corroded tags and loose buckles suggest these belong to real passengers, even though their names are now lost. The placement and type of luggage help identify areas of the ship and movement patterns during the sinking. Scattered among the wreckage, small personal items stand out for their relative preservation. A stopped watch, a simple comb, a metal case, ordinary habits carried to the ocean floor. These objects don't reveal names, but they confirm individual presence in specific areas of the ship. Each item acts as a silent marker of interrupted routine. Titanic's internal routes reveal how passengers and crew attempted to move during the sinking. Broken stairways and twisted handrails point to areas of intense traffic in the final moments. Deformation in these structures helps identify the ship's angle and the most used paths toward the upper decks. The submersible advances into an area where the sediment appears less disturbed by currents. The seabed's stability suggests partial protection since the sinking. These environments tend to preserve objects closer to their original positions. From here on, small differences begin to matter. To see what these clues reveal, subscribe and follow this exploration to the end. In this interior section, some objects appear not isolated, but in closely spaced pairs. This repetition stands out because it differs from patterns seen elsewhere in the ship. In unstable environments, items tend to disperse. Here, proximity suggests these objects arrived together and have remained so since the sinking. The repetition of similar objects reinforces that this location differs from other areas of the ship. 2 pairs of shoes and 2 brushes appear close together, preserved at the same sediment level. In an environment where most items were scattered, this duplication suggests they reached the seabed together and remained undisturbed over time. The submersible enters a tighter space, shielded by collapsed metal structures. These barriers reduced current strength over the decades. This type of structural shelter explains why some objects stayed near their original positions. Environments like this act as preservation capsules within the ship. In certain interior areas, subtle signs of human presence appear beyond personal belongings. Organic materials have vanished, but small isolated bones remain visible in the sediment. These traces indicate locations where the human body was not fully dispersed by currents. Here begins the transition from artifacts to human remains. Preserved human remains are rarely found on the Titanic. In most cases, bones appear scattered and partially buried by sediment. Their position and condition help researchers understand how currents and structural collapse acted after the sinking. Analysis always begins with careful observation, never rushed conclusions. In this protected area, human remains do not appear dispersed like those seen earlier. Two skeletal sets lie very close together, with nearly parallel spines and joints partially covered by sediment. This proximity defies the typical debris field pattern. The arrangement suggests both arrived together and were not separated by significant currents. The positioning of the remains becomes unmistakable. Two complete human skeletons lie side by side, arms positioned in an intertwined arrangement. Both rest beneath a collapsed metal structure that acted as protection from currents and movement. This configuration is extremely rare at the wreck site. Preservation here is explained by the environment. A collapsed metal structure provides shelter, reducing direct current exposure. Fine sediment settles steadily, covering joints and helping maintain position over long periods. In exposed areas, this pattern rarely occurs. The primary evidence here is site stability. Archaeological interpretation begins with comparison, position, distribution, and structural context. Researchers evaluate whether proximity results from currents, internal collapse, or stable deposition. Associated objects and orientation are also examined. The goal isn't to create an immediate story, but to define what the evidence allows us to state with confidence. The dynamics of the sinking left clear marks inside the ship. Exposed piping, tilted corridors, and internal ruptures trace the path of flooding and collapse. These signs help reconstruct how the Titanic broke apart and settled on the seabed. Damage orientation reveals force direction and distinct phases of the final descent. The ocean preserves materials unevenly. Metals and ceramics endure for decades, while fabric and paper disappear quickly. Human bones remain when protected by stable sediment. Understanding this difference is essential to interpreting what we see today. The absence of certain materials is itself meaningful evidence. The submersible returns to the skeletons for a wider view. Observing the surroundings clarifies the relationship between human remains, collapsed structure, and preserved space. This visual pullback prepares the final interpretation, connecting individual details to the overall scale of the disaster. In the final frame, scale becomes undeniable. The human skeletons occupy only a fraction of the space compared to the massive hull and structures of the Titanic. This contrast reinforces the human dimension of the disaster. Among tons of steel, two bodies remain the quietest record of the sinking. At this moment, there is nothing new to extract, only silent observation. The submersible's light rests on the skeletons as the surrounding environment fades into darkness. No visible currents disturb the site. The impact comes from stillness and from the permanence of this position after more than a century on the ocean floor. Before leaving the site, final records include personal objects near the human remains. These items align with body position and structural context. They do not identify individuals, but they reinforce the archaeological interpretation of the grouping. The final reading depends on the relationship between remains, objects, and environment. With documentation complete, the submersible begins its retreat. Light gradually fades, returning the space to deep darkness. The Titanic remains still, preserving traces that have resisted time, pressure, and currents. On the floor of the North Atlantic, silence takes over once again.